The camera clicks, the flash explodes, and there she is, frozen in silver nitrate, flawless under the glinting spotlight. Her smile is dazzling, her figure divine, her presence undeniable. She's the picture of everything the golden age of Hollywood demanded. Beauty, charm, charisma, and yet, off-camera, in studio offices thick with cigar smoke and ego, a word floats like perfume turned poison. She's dumb. It echoes behind closed doors. It drips from gossip columnists' pens. It's whispered on sets, muttered at dinner parties, and etched into public consciousness, not as an observation, but a sentence. Dumb. Not troubled, not complex, not wounded, just dumb. She knew it too. They all did. The actresses with the glittering eyes and the men with the granite jaws. Some played into it. Some fought it. Others crumbled beneath it. Because in the rigid architecture of Golden Age stardom, there wasn't room for contradiction. You were either brilliant or beautiful. Rarely both, but behind those painted smiles and polished scripts, something else flickered, like light through celluloid. Tonight we tell the stories of the ones they called dumb, not because they were, but because it was easier than understanding them. And if you listen closely, past the laughter, the scripts, the roles, they're still speaking. Let's begin. The glitz, the gossip, the expectations. Hollywood in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s wasn't just a place, it was a machine. A dream factory built on beauty and illusion, where stars were sculpted like marble statues and stories were engineered to enchant the masses. The system didn't reward authenticity, it rewarded image, archetypes. Brands before branding had a name, and within this shimmering constellation, a dangerous narrative brewed. That intelligence was expendable, even undesirable, particularly if you were beautiful. Men could be rough around the edges, unpolished, they'd say, with a chuckle and a puff of a cigar. But women? If they were blonde, curvy, giggly, or too poised to challenge the script, they were labeled dumb blonde, empty-headed starlet, studio pet. Never mind their instincts, their quick wit, their survival skills in a cutthroat industry. If they played comedic roles, they must be clueless. If they leaned into sex appeal, they must be slow. In truth, many were neither. But perception in Hollywood was everything. Luella Parsons and Hedda Hopper, gossip columnists with readerships in the millions, could build or destroy a career with a single insinuation. The producers played God. Directors chose who would shine and who would disappear. The public, they devoured every morsel, accepting the narrative they were fed. But behind the scenes, behind the lashes and lipstick, there was so much more. Let's start with the most infamous of them all, the one who became the poster girl for dumb and was anything but. Marilyn Monroe, the poster girl for dumb. They called her a joke with a heartbeat, a walking sigh, a bombshell too dazed to light her own fuse. But Marilyn Monroe, born Norma Jean Mortensen, was playing chess while everyone assumed she couldn't spell. Her legend began as it ended, wrapped in tragedy, misunderstanding, and the unbearable weight of being seen, but never really known. She crafted the dumb blonde persona with surgical precision. The whispery voice, the breathless laugh, the little girl lost routine that made powerful men feel safe, and powerful women wary. Hollywood saw a toy. Marilyn was building a weapon. It was armor, and beneath it, a mind that rarely slept. She read Dostoevsky in between takes, carried Rilke in her purse, scribbled poetry on hotel stationery. She studied acting not casually, but obsessively, under Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio, where she was known for her vulnerability, her intuition, and her hunger to go deeper than any role allowed. Behind her were orphanages, foster homes, trauma layered like bricks. She knew what it was to be discarded. She knew that beauty bought her space, but only if she kept it soft, silly, safe. She was underestimated so thoroughly it became a cloak. Producers spoke to her like a child. Directors got impatient. One famously screamed, "She's too stupid to understand motivation," while Marilyn stood motionless, soaking up the insult. Only later did he realize she'd just been trying to feel the scene. She wrote in her journals, "I'm not a joke. I'm just not understood." She formed her own production company, Marilyn Monroe Productions, in 1954, a move nearly unheard of for women at the time. The industry mocked it. She ignored them. That year, she flew to New York, leaving behind the leash of 20th Century Fox to train as a serious actress. She wanted to be more than the dumb blonde. She was more. But the world wasn't ready to let her be both sexy and serious. Even her marriage to Arthur Miller, the intellectual playwright, became a public circus. People wondered aloud what he saw in her, as though she couldn't comprehend Chekhov, as though tragedy didn't already live in her bones. The dumb label stuck until the very end. Even her death, shrouded in speculation, was dismissed as the final act of a lost, foolish girl. But Marilyn knew the truth. She once said, "If I'm a star, then the people made me a star. But they made me into a joke, too." And like many jokes, it was crafted with perfect timing, hidden pain, and a silent punchline no one saw coming. Now, let's meet the woman who beat every man at his own game, and then convinced the world she didn't even know how to play. Judy Holliday, too smart to be believed. She played the dizzy dame like no one else, stammering, flustered, wide-eyed, and adorably confused. Judy Holliday could reduce a room to hysterics with a single mispronounced word or misplaced pause. But behind that deliberate clumsiness was an intellect so sharp it could slice through steel. Judy Holliday wasn't just smart. She was genius-level smart. With an IQ reportedly in the 170s, she was fluent in multiple languages, a chess prodigy, and someone who read philosophy for fun between rehearsals. Friends said her humor wasn't just clever, it was scalpel precise. She understood timing, irony, tone, structure. She didn't perform dumbness by accident. She weaponized it. Her breakout role was Billy Dawn in Born Yesterday, 1950. A seemingly brainless showgirl whose journey from clueless to confident is both hilarious and heartbreaking. Judy won the Academy Award for Best Actress for that role, beating out Bette Davis and Gloria Swanson. But the irony was rich. The industry cheered her as the best dumb blonde of her generation. Very few seemed to realize she was satirizing the stereotype in real time. Or perhaps they did, and were afraid to admit it. She used her persona to disarm critics and maneuver around the brutal politics of show business. When the House Un-American Activities Committee came knocking during the Red Scare, Judy was subpoenaed. She was a suspected communist sympathizer, not because she was politically loud, but because she kept company with intellectuals, artists, and other untrustworthy minds. When called to testify, she didn't plead the Fifth. She didn't grandstand. Instead, she used what one columnist called the best performance of her life, acting confused, unhelpful, and so delightfully off-topic that the committee let her go. They didn't think she was worth the trouble. They thought she was dumb. She wasn't. Judy once quipped, "You have to be smart to play dumb well." But behind the smile was exhaustion, the burden of constantly pretending to be less than you are. The performance never stopped. Not on set, not in interviews, not even at parties. She was intensely private. She preferred music to parties, books to chatter. She feared the world would never accept her brilliance if it came wrapped in a woman's skin. When she died of cancer at just 43, many mourned the cute, funny girl. Few remembered the mind. Judy Holliday's legacy is a paradox. She was punished for her intellect by being forced to bury it under layers of silken slapstick. Now let's shift the gaze. From women forced to appear smaller to a man who was called dumb for something different, something rougher, more primal, but just as misunderstood. Clark Gable, the king who spoke with his eyes. He was the king of Hollywood, that square-jawed icon who could melt hearts with a smirk and freeze enemies with a stare. Clark Gable didn't need flowery dialogue or poetic speeches. He could silence a room just by lighting a cigarette. But some in Hollywood, behind the scenes, whispered something else, that he wasn't all there, that he was just a handsome brute with a lucky streak, that if you stripped away the mustache, there wasn't much man left at all. He didn't come from finishing schools or theater pedigrees. Born in Ohio, Gable worked in tire factories and oil fields before drifting toward acting. He didn't quote Shakespeare. He didn't hide his awkward grammar or the fact that he never finished high school. To many in the elite circles of the industry, he was a blunt instrument, gorgeous, magnetic, but intellectually disposable. One executive once said of him, "Gable speaks in verbs, big ones." And yet, he had the instincts of a wolf and the heart of a man who had survived. Gable understood audiences, understood timing, understood power, when to exert it and when to hold back. His approach was primal, intuitive, and devastatingly effective. He made choices on camera that acting coaches couldn't teach. And while others chased technique, Gable chased truth. He knew what men wanted to be and what women wanted to watch. He carved out a space where masculinity didn't have to apologize, but still had room for tenderness. Off-screen, he was self-deprecating, aware of the rumors. He didn't try to impress the studio heads with fancy words. He impressed them with box office numbers. But behind that casual exterior was a man riddled with pain. He carried guilt for the death of his beloved wife, Carol Lombard, whose plane crashed in 1942. Friends said he never fully recovered. He enlisted in the Air Force that same year, not as a publicity stunt, but as a man with nothing left to lose. He flew combat missions, real ones, with real bullets. He was called simple by journalists, basic by peers. But in war, in grief, in love, he showed a quiet intelligence, an emotional depth that spoke volumes without needing to speak at all. And in his final film, The Misfits, opposite a visibly fading Marilyn Monroe, it was Gable who held the movie together. His performance was raw, weathered, almost prophetic. He died of a heart attack just days after filming ended. The king was dead. And suddenly, the critics who once mocked his simplicity realized it had always been sincerity. Clark Gable wasn't dumb. He just didn't care to speak the language of phoniness. Now we weave their stories together. 3 souls, 3 reputations, and one haunting question. Why did we ever believe they were dumb? Character arc through the vignettes, the weight of a label. They lived in different bodies, played different roles, moved through different corners of Hollywood. But Marilyn, Judy, and Clark were bound by something deeper than fame. They were misunderstood by design. Hollywood didn't just reward typecasting, it required it. To be a star was to embody a myth so thoroughly, the truth became irrelevant. And once a label stuck, it clung tighter than chiffon in summer heat. Dumb was one of the cruelest myths of all. It stripped actors of complexity. It turned depth into liability. And it gave audiences permission to mock, to laugh at rather than with. But underneath the public images, their arcs were tragic, because each of them knew what the world saw and what it didn't. Marilyn played her part so well that even those closest to her forgot where the act ended. She was a woman fighting to be taken seriously, while being rewarded every time she made herself smaller. The more she tried to speak in her own voice, the more the world turned up the volume on the one they wanted to hear. Breathier, softer, dumber, Judy, the intellectual savant, leaned into a persona that delighted the masses and deflected scrutiny. She outwitted senators with charm and survived the blacklist with satire. But the toll was immense. She lived half a life in the shadows of her own brilliance. Her laughter, so infectious on screen, became quieter in private, exhausted from pretending. And Gable, gruff and grounded, carried himself with the quiet assurance of a man who'd already been underestimated. His intelligence didn't come through grand speeches or political alliances. It lived in the eyes, in the silences between lines, in the choices he made, on screen and off. Each of them performed a version of dumb, not because they were, but because they had to. It was camouflage, it was armor, it was survival. And the most painful part? The world loved them for it, rewarded them, idolized them, then forgot what it had done. Because when you wear a mask long enough, people stop believing there was ever a face beneath it. Now let's step back into the past, into the quiet corners of their lives, the flashbacks, the whispers, the moments that proved just how wrong the world was. Flashback-infused revelations. What the world missed. Imagine it. A dressing room on the Fox lot, 1953. Marilyn Monroe sits in front of a mirror, the final curls of her platinum hair setting in place. But her eyes aren't on her reflection. They're on the book in her lap. Ulysses by James Joyce. She reads slowly, lips silently forming the words, savoring the complexity. The makeup artist glances at the book, scoffs. "You actually reading that thing, honey?" She just smiles, turns the page and whispers, "You wouldn't understand." Cut to 1952, a smoky back room behind a New York theater. Judy Holliday is in deep conversation with a physicist, yes, that kind of physicist, about quantum mechanics. He's losing track. She isn't. She's making jokes, yes, but the kind that require knowledge and nerve. Later that week, in an interview, she tells the press she never really understood long division. They laugh. She lets them. It's easier that way. Flashback to 1943, a military airfield in England. Clark Gable climbs into a B-17 bomber with the 351st Bomb Group. He's not there for a photo op. He's there for war. Flak shreds the sky around him. Later, he writes letters home, not to brag, not for publication, but because he can't sleep. The studio, worried about losing their golden goose, pressures him to stop. He doesn't, not until the missions are over. These moments weren't headlines. They weren't framed or preserved in gossip columns. They were fleeting, fragile, and real. In private, they were thinkers, learners, strategists, survivors. But in public, they played dumb. Because that's what the studio needed. That's what the audience expected. That's what kept the checks coming and the roles offered. Every time they offered the world a glimpse of something deeper, the shutters came down. Don't ruin the illusion, they were told. Stick to what sells. So they split themselves in two, the persona and the person. And they let the persona win. Because in Golden Age Hollywood, the truth was dangerous and dumb was safe. But what they left behind, those books, those letters, those late-night conversations and unscripted moments, prove they were never what the world said they were. Let's bring those fragments together now, one last time, in a mosaic of quiet brilliance. The big unravel. The lights have dimmed. The applause has faded. The stars are gone. But the image remains. The manufactured version, polished and impenetrable. And yet, if you look closely, you can see it cracking. Underneath the glamour, the legends, the studio-engineered perfection, lies the truth. Let's unravel it. In 1955, Marilyn Monroe stood on a Manhattan stage reading Chekhov in front of hardened theater critics. They had sneered at her before she opened her mouth. She was the blonde from the movies. She'd never survived the silence of serious theater, but when she spoke, hesitant, soft, real, they leaned in. One critic later admitted she knew what loss sounded like. No review was ever printed. The moment faded. But in that room, for a breathless second, the world saw her mind. In a Washington, D.C. hallway, Judy Holliday walked out of a HUAC hearing and burst into laughter. Not because it was funny, but because she had just survived something no comedy could touch. She had played dumb for the smartest men in the room, and they hadn't even realized it. One aide whispered, "That girl doesn't know how lucky she is." But he was wrong. She knew exactly what she'd done. And Clark Gable, toward the end, sat across from director John Huston while filming The Misfits, his hands trembling, his breath labored. Huston asked if he was okay. Gable simply said, "I'm trying to give the best I've ever given." For her. For me, he meant Marilyn. He meant the truth. In that film, both of them laid their masks on the floor and stepped into something rawer than either had been allowed to show before. For once, they weren't playing types. They were playing people, and it cost them dearly. These weren't outliers. They were emblems of a system that rewarded the myth and punished the mind. They weren't dumb. They were devoured. And as we look back on their lives, not with pity but with clarity, we begin to see the intelligence that pulsed beneath every smile, every scripted giggle, every perfectly timed line. The act of appearing dumb was not failure. It was strategy. It was artistry. It was defense, and sometimes it was the only way to be heard at all. So what happens when we stop listening to the myth and start listening to the silence behind it? We see them, really see them, for the first time. A poetic ending. The camera fades. The laughter echoes. The lights go down on a soundstage that once sparkled like heaven itself. And what's left? Not the applause, not the awards, not the headlines. What's left is the silence, the truth that lives in the spaces between the roles, between the rumors, between the years. They weren't dumb. They were human, complex, bruised, bright, forced to shrink themselves into characters the world could understand. Because the world wasn't ready for their contradictions. Marilyn Monroe wasn't a joke. She was a poem too complicated for her time. Judy Holliday wasn't just a clown. She was a scholar who chose laughter over lectures, because the world would only let her in if she wore a mask. Clark Gable wasn't just a king. He was a soldier, a widower, a man whose quiet strength outlasted every insult. They didn't fail to be brilliant. We failed to notice it. And so, as the golden age flickers like old film stock and their images grow grainier with time, let us remember them not for the parts they played, but for the truths they buried in their performances. The genius behind the giggle, the grit beneath the glamour, the minds we overlooked because they were too clever to show their cards. In the end, it wasn't intelligence they lacked, it was permission. And still, they shone. Because even in a world that tried to dim their light, they found a way to glow. Forever. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment down below as it helps support this channel. Also, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our newest videos. Thanks for watching.